The collapse of a gilded cage. Elena's reckoning. Hello, everyone. If you ever thought you knew the person beside you, prepare to hear a story that will chill you to the bone. It's a story about love, betrayal, and the incredible power we find when everything we know shatters. If this story touches your heart, give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our most impactful narratives. And now, let's dive into the exact moment Elena's life turned into a nightmare. The sound that shattered her world was not a scream or a crash. It was a laugh. The laugh of a woman, light and melodic, echoing from the master bedroom that she and Ricardo had designed together. Elena Castillo, 7 months pregnant and carrying a bag of groceries, froze in the marble foyer of her own home. The perfume of an unknown, expensive, strong floral fragrance, so different from her own subtle jasmine scent, floated in the air. Then she saw them. A pair of impossible blood-red stiletto heels, carelessly tossed onto the Persian rug. They were not hers. And in that silent, suffocating moment, Elena knew her life was a lie. Chapter 1. The Broken Foundation. The air in Toledo was heavy with the late August humidity, promising a storm that had not yet broken. Elena felt a similar pressure building in her chest as she closed the heavy oak front door. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the cavernous silence, a silence immediately betrayed by another wave of that musical laughter coming from upstairs. Her hands, slick with sweat, tightened around the paper grocery bags. Lentils, quinoa, prenatal vitamins, the mundane ingredients of a life she believed was real. She set the bags down on the polished granite kitchen island, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were a visitor in a museum of her own life. Everything was impeccable. The stainless steel Sub-Zero refrigerator, the gleaming wolf range, the custom cabinetry that cost more than her parents' first house. Ricardo Navarro demanded perfection, and Elena, for 10 years, had been the perfect curator of his perfect world. Her bare feet made no sound on the cool travertine floors as she moved toward the sweeping, curved staircase. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumming against the soft, steady rhythm of the baby moving inside her. Breathe, Elena. Just breathe. But the air was too thin, stolen by the woman upstairs. Halfway up the stairs, she heard his voice, low and laced with a tone of amusement she hadn't heard in years. Easy, Sophia. We have time. She's at her Pilates class. Sophia. The name was a shard of glass in her throat. Sophia Vega, the new vice president of marketing at Ricardo's investment firm. Elena had met her once at a company gala. She was young, sharp, with a predatory smile and a designer dress that looked poured onto her body. In that moment, Elena had felt antique and invisible next to her, and now she knew why. She reached the top of the staircase, her hand tracing the cold, smooth wood of the railing. Her bedroom door was ajar. Opening it felt like opening the door to a tomb, and there they were. Ricardo, her husband of a decade, the man whose child she carried, stood only in his suit trousers, his back to her. In front of him, sitting on the edge of their bed, her bed, was Sophia Vega, draped in a black silk robe that Elena recognized as her own. The red stilettos in the foyer now made horrifying sense. Sophia was laughing, head thrown back, as Ricardo leaned down to kiss her neck. The world stopped in that instant. The blood rushing in Elena's ears drowned out all sound, except the frantic beat of her own heart. Ricardo! Her voice was a whisper, a dry leaf rustling on the ground. It was barely a sound, yet it cut through the moment like a surgeon's scalpel. He froze. He snapped his head up and turned slowly. His eyes widened in a fleeting expression of panic before settling into a familiar mask of annoyance. It was the same look he gave her when she overcooked his steak, or when a stock he invested in dropped a quarter point. "Elena, what are you doing home so early?" he said, his voice calm and controlled. Sofia Vega slid off the bed, clutching the silk robe tighter around herself. Her masterfully made-up face showed a flash of triumph. She wasn't ashamed. She was victorious. "My class was canceled," Elena said, her gaze locked on Ricardo. She could feel the baby moving, a flurry of limbs that mirrored her own internal chaos. "I obviously should have called first. It seems I'm interrupting." Ricardo ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. He took a step toward her, away from Sofia, a subconscious act of distancing. "Look, Elena, let's not be dramatic. It's not what it looks like." The lie was so bald, so insulting, it almost made her laugh. "It's not what it looks like?" she repeated, her voice trembling. She gestured with a shaking hand toward Sofia, who was now watching them with a distant curiosity, like a scientist observing rats in a maze. "Then what is it, Ricardo? What exactly am I seeing?" "It was a mistake," he said, his tone shifting from annoyance to appeasement. It was his deal-closing voice, the one he used to charm investors and crush opponents. "Sofia and I had a stressful week. It meant nothing. It meant enough for her to already be wearing my robe in our bed," Elena countered, a surge of adrenaline piercing the shock. Sofia finally spoke, her voice smooth as polished stone. "Perhaps you should leave, Elena. Give him some space to think." The sheer audacity of the demand took Elena's breath away. To be told to leave her own house by the woman sleeping with her husband. Elena's gaze snapped to her. "Don't you talk to me! Gather your things and get out of my house!" Ricardo stepped between them. "Enough. Elena, calm down. You're pregnant. You can't get this upset." He was using their baby as a shield, a tool to manage her. "Don't you dare," she whispered, the words raw with pain. "Don't you dare use our child to excuse this, to excuse her. It's an affair, Elena. It happens," he finally exploded, his frustration boiling over. The charming facade cracked, revealing the ugly arrogance beneath. "My God, you're acting like it's the end of the world. We'll get over it. People do." He didn't understand. He thought this was an item on a financial balance sheet, a temporary dip he could correct. He couldn't see that he had just used a hammer to shatter the very foundation of her life. The house, the marriage, the future she carried inside her. Everything was a glass house, and he had just smashed every last pane. "No," she said, her voice suddenly clear and tranquil, the eye of her own personal hurricane. "We are not getting over this." She turned without looking at either of them again. She walked down the stairs, each step a measured, agonizing movement. She picked up her car keys from the bowl by the door. Her hand wasn't even shaking anymore. It was numb, a ghost in her own house. "Elena, where are you going?" Ricardo called from the top of the stairs. "Don't be ridiculous. We need to talk about this." She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. She could hear the first thick drops of rain beginning to beat against the windows. The promised storm had finally arrived. Without turning around, she said, "There's nothing left to talk about." She walked out the door and into the rain, leaving the keys to the Mercedes on the porch. She did not look back. She had no destination. She only knew she could never, ever return. The life she had known was over. Chapter 2. The Strategic Retreat. The rain fell in blinding sheets, blurring the manicured gardens and stone facades of the estate into a watercolor wash of greens and grays. Elena drove, her hands gripping the steering wheel of her modest Honda CR-V, the car Ricardo called her errand mobile, with white-knuckled intensity. She had no destination, only a direction. Away. Every kilometer she put between herself and the glass house was a small, defiant breath of air in her new, suffocating reality. For the first hour, she was on autopilot, her mind a whir of shock and betrayal. The image of Sofia in her robe, of Ricardo's expression of annoyance, played on a torturous loop. Tears ran down her face, mixing with the rain on the window she had opened, needing to feel something real. But as the initial wave of grief subsided, it was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Elena had spent 10 years subsumed by Ricardo's life. She had given up her promising career in art curation to become Mrs. Navarro, a role that involved managing 3 properties, organizing charity galas, and ensuring Ricardo's life flowed with perfection, friction-free. She had become an accessory, and like any outdated accessory, she had just been replaced. The power imbalance in their relationship had always been there, a silent current. It was his name, his money, his world. She was simply allowed to live in it. Now expelled, she felt a terrifying, dizzying sense of freedom. He thought she was just a dramatic, hormonal, pregnant woman who would drive a few blocks, cry, and come home, ready to talk. He was wrong. Her mind, once preoccupied with guest lists and dinner menus, began functioning with a long, dormant, strategic precision. She pulled into a highway rest stop, the car engine rattling in the sudden silence. She pulled out her iPhone, Ricardo's face smiling at her from the lock screen, a picture from Italy last summer. A lie. With a trembling finger, she turned it off. Next, she opened the glove compartment and took out a small, cheap burner phone she had bought months ago. Not that she had expected this exact scenario, but she had seen the small signs of Ricardo's increasing detachment. His late nights at the office, the scent of that same perfume on his suit jacket weeks ago, which he had dismissed as a coworker. A quiet, nagging instinct had told her to prepare a life raft, a small act of self-preservation. She had also been quietly diverting small amounts from the household account into a separate bank account under her maiden name, Elena Castillo. It wasn't much by Ricardo's standards, just over 50,000 euros. But to her, in that moment, it was the keys to a new kingdom. She turned on the burner phone and made her first call. It rang 3 times before a calm, familiar voice answered. "Timoteo, it's Elena." Timoteo Garcia had been her best friend in college, a brilliant, kind-hearted history major who had become one of Madrid's most formidable divorce lawyers. They had drifted apart after she married Ricardo, a distance Elena now realized Ricardo had subtly orchestrated. "Elena, my God, are you all right?" he asked, his voice instantly tinged with concern. The dam broke. The carefully constructed calm shattered, and she began to sob, the ugly gulping sounds of a broken heart. "No, Tim, nothing is right. I came home. He was with someone, in our bed." She didn't have to say who. Timoteo was silent for a moment, letting her cry. There was no pity in his silence, only a deep, anchoring empathy. "Where are you?" "On the highway." "I don't know. I just left." "Okay, Elena, listen to me. Do not go to your parents' house. Do not go to a friend's house. He will look there first. Find a non-chain hotel, something small, and pay with cash. Your iPhone is off, right? Good. He can track it. The CRV has a GPS tracker linked to his security service. We need to get rid of it. Tomorrow, I will wire money from a client's trust account. You will use that cash to buy a used car, something discreet. In the meantime, I want you to go to 3 different ATMs at different banks and withdraw the largest amount of cash you can from that account you have. Then, stay hidden. Do not call anyone but me, and only from this phone. Are you with me?" His instructions were a lifeline in the storm. He wasn't just offering sympathy, he was giving her a plan. He was handing her back a sense of agency. "Yes, Timoteo, I'm with you." "Good girl," he said softly. "You're stronger than you think, Dory. He never deserved you." Meanwhile, back at the estate, Ricardo Navarro was growing impatient. After Sophia hastily dressed and left in a taxi with a slight smirk still on her face, Ricardo had paced the bedroom. He had called Elena's phone a dozen times, each call going straight to voicemail. He called her mother, who hadn't heard from her. He checked his car tracker, which showed her on the highway, heading west. "Damn it," he muttered. This was more than her usual temper tantrum. It was inconvenient. He had a major merger to close next week. He didn't have time for this domestic drama. He poured himself a glass of Macallan 25. The amber liquid did little to soothe his irritation. He looked around the silent, cavernous house. Elena's presence was everywhere. In the fresh flowers on the mantelpiece, the curated art on the walls, the stack of baby-naming books on the nightstand. Her absence was a void, and it unsettled him. He believed, with the unwavering arrogance of a man who had never faced real consequences, that this was a negotiation. She was raising the stakes. She would eventually call, demand an apology, a ridiculously expensive piece of jewelry, a trip to Paris. He would concede. She would come home, and things would return to normal. He would just have to be more discreet with Sophia in the future. He sent a text message, certain it would eventually be delivered. "Elena, this is insane. Come home. We need to be adults about this. Think about the baby." He had no idea that the Elena he was messaging no longer existed. Miles away, in a run-down motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant, the new Elena was methodically erasing herself. She withdrew cash, her face obscured by a hooded sweatshirt. She used the motel's patchy Wi-Fi on a disposable laptop to close all her social media accounts. She was a ghost, a specter. She lay on the lumpy bed, one hand resting protectively on her swollen abdomen. The baby moved, a soft reminder of the life that was entirely hers. The one thing Ricardo could not touch, could not control, could not devalue. He thought he had taken everything from her. As she lay there in the anonymous darkness, Elena Castillo realized she had nothing left to lose. And that made her, for the first time in a long time, powerful. Do you want to continue the story, focusing on the legal battle and the eventual birth of Leo? Chapter 3. The Cold Resolve. 3 months passed. The chaos of that scorching August settled into the quiet embers of cold, determined resolve. Ricardo's initial annoyance had transformed into a simmering rage. Elena hadn't returned home. She hadn't called. The texts and voicemails, first placating, then demanding, then threatening, went unanswered. Her credit cards were unused. Her bank account remained untouched after the initial cash withdrawals. She had disappeared as completely as smoke. He hired a private detective, a bulldog-faced ex-cop named Perez, with a steep price tag. Perez eventually found the abandoned CRV in a long-term parking lot at a bus station in Valencia. The trail went cold there. Perez assured Ricardo that women like Elena always resurface. "They need money, Señor Navarro. They get lonely. They make a mistake. We'll find her." Ricardo's life in this glass house continued, but its flawless surface now showed cracks. Sofia Vega had moved in, her vibrant modern possessions clashing with Elena's subtle, classic taste. She filled the closets with her designer clothes and the bathrooms with her expensive perfumes, but her presence felt like a performance. The light, musical laughter that Ricardo once found so alluring now irritated him. She was always on, ambitious, demanding, constantly angling for a more permanent position. The ring, the title of the next Mrs. Navarro. She was a transaction, and Ricardo was beginning to feel he had made a poor bargain. The easy, flowing comfort Elena had provided was gone, replaced by a constant, low-level tension. Building a new sanctuary far from the fragile opulence of the estate, Elena Castillo was breathing again. She had driven the used 2012 Toyota Camry she bought with cash to Granada, a city nestled in the misty Sierra Nevada mountains. She rented a small, furnished 2-bedroom apartment using her maiden name. She paid the first 6 months' rent in cash and introduced herself to her neighbors as Anna, a writer on a quiet retreat. Her life was simple, anonymous, and hers. She spent her days walking the winding mountain paths, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs. She discovered a small, independent bookstore where she spent hours reading, a cup of herbal tea cooling beside her. She joined a prenatal yoga class, not the sleek, competitive studio she had attended at the estate, but a warm, welcoming space filled with women of all shapes and sizes. Here, she was not Mrs. Ricardo Navarro. She was simply Elena, a woman about to become a mother. Her second room was slowly transforming into a nursery. She painted the walls a soft, buttery yellow herself, bought a simple wooden crib from a local artisan, and knitted a small, crooked blanket. Every object was chosen with love, not for its brand or its ability to impress. This life was authentic in a way her former life never had been. She spoke to Timoteo Garcia once a week from her burner phone. He was her anchor, her strategist. He had discreetly filed for a legal separation on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, serving Ricardo at his office. The move was designed to protect Elena's maternal rights and a portion of the marital assets without revealing her location. Ricardo had been blindsided. The filing, delivered by a stoic process server in the middle of a board meeting, was a declaration of war. He engaged his own lawyers, a team of sharks from one of Madrid's top firms, who filed a response, accusing Elena of being emotionally unstable and of kidnapping their unborn child. It was a vicious, calculated attack. "Don't let it get to you," Timoteo told her during one of their calls. Elena was sitting on her small balcony, watching the sun set behind the Veleta Peak, painting the sky with shades of purple and gold. It's standard procedure for a narcissist with a bottomless war chest. They attack, they defame, they try to control the narrative. But we have the truth on our side, Elena, and more importantly, we have a plan. The plan was patience. Elena was to remain hidden, establish residency in Andalusia, and build a stable life for her son. The moment the baby was born, they would amend the filing and sue for full custody and divorce on her terms. But the solitude, though healing, was also a breeding ground for fear. Some nights she woke up in a cold sweat, the memory of Ricardo's fury, a tangible presence in the room. She would imagine him finding her, his expensive car pulling up to her modest apartment building. The power he wielded, the money, the connections, felt like an insurmountable force. She would place a hand on her stomach, feeling her son's strong, steady movements, and draw strength from him. She was no longer fighting just for herself. She was fighting for him. Chapter 4. The hunter becomes the hunted. On a cold November afternoon, while researching pediatricians, an unfamiliar name popped up on a Granada mother's social media group. Sofia Vega has joined the group. Elena's blood ran cold. It had to be a coincidence. There could be hundreds, thousands of Sofia Vegas in the world. She clicked the profile. The photo was of a glamorous, smiling woman holding a champagne flute on a yacht. The profile listed her location as Madrid. But why join a group in Granada? Then she saw the post, made only an hour earlier. "Hi, ladies. My partner and I are thinking of relocating to your beautiful city. He's in finance and can work remotely anywhere. We're looking for a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools. Thanks in advance for any recommendations." It wasn't a coincidence. Did they know? Or were they close? The private detective must have found something. A digital breadcrumb. A whisper. They were hunting her. The quiet sanctuary she had so carefully built was no longer safe. The storm she had avoided was brewing again, right on her doorstep. The digital intrusion felt like an invasion of her home. Elena stared at Sophia's smiling profile picture, the cheerful emoji at the end of her post, a sneering smile. It was a probe, a baited hook cast into the tranquil waters of her new life. They weren't in Granada yet, but they were testing the ground, trying to smoke her out. Panic surged through her, cold and sharp. Her first instinct was to flee again, pack her bags, jump in the car, and drive until the city was a dot in her rearview mirror. She stood up, her hands trembling, and paced the small living room. But where would she go? The world suddenly felt small, and Ricardo's reach seemed impossibly long. She clutched her belly, the weight of her son a steadying force. No, she couldn't run forever. Running was what he expected. It was the act of a victim. She had spent the last 3 months building a life, not a hiding place. She would not let them tear it down so easily. She grabbed the burner phone and called Timoteo. Her voice was tight with fear as she explained what she had found. "It's okay, Elena. Stay calm." Timoteo's voice was firm, a rock in her sea of anxiety. "This is a tactic. They don't have your address. They probably don't even know for sure you're in Granada. Perez, the detective, likely traced an IP signal or a data point to that geographical area. This is a fishing expedition. They're hoping you'll panic and make a mistake." "What do I do, Timoteo?" "Nothing," he said firmly. "You do absolutely nothing. You don't engage. You tighten your privacy settings and you get on with your life. But be vigilant. Lock your doors. Be aware of your surroundings. They've shown their hand. Now we wait." His confidence was a bomb, but a seed of terror had been planted. Every unfamiliar car that drove down her street, every look from a stranger at the grocery store, felt like a threat. The peace she had found in the mountains was gone, replaced by a constant, humming dread. Chapter 5. The Birth and the Counterattack. Weeks later, in the sterile, quiet environment of a hospital room in Granada, Elena's world shifted on its axis. After 12 hours of grueling labor, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Leo Castillo. Holding him for the first time, his small, wrinkled body warm against her chest, Elena felt a love so fierce and protective that it eclipsed every other emotion. The fear, the anger, the betrayal, it all faded into the background. Looking into her son's deep blue eyes, she knew she was no longer a victim. She was a mother, a warrior. The moment she was discharged from the hospital, she called Timoteo. "He's here, Tim," she said, her voice husky with emotion as she looked at Leo sleeping in his car seat. "He's perfect." "Congratulations, Elena," he said, and she could hear the genuine joy in his voice. "I am so happy for you. Are you ready?" "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "Let's do this. Let's finish it." The next day, a process server walked for the second time into Ricardo Navarro's gleaming Madrid office. He handed a stunned Ricardo a new set of documents. They were not a response. They were an offense, a petition for divorce based on adultery, a request for an emergency hearing to establish paternity, and full legal and physical custody for Elena. Attached were a copy of Leo Castillo's birth certificate and a request for a restraining order, citing Ricardo's increasingly aggressive behavior and use of a private detective as harassment. Ricardo stared at the papers. His face turned a deep, mottled red. The name Leo Castillo leaped off the page. Castillo. She hadn't given him his name. She had erased him completely. This was not the scared, emotional woman who had run out in the rain. This was a strategic, calculated assault. She wasn't hiding in a corner, waiting to be found. She was attacking. The imbalance of power he had relied on his entire life had just been reversed. And for the first time, Ricardo Navarro felt a genuine pang of fear. Would you like to conclude the story with the legal battle, the final confrontation, and Elena's ultimate victory and peace? Chapter 6. The King Without Clothes. The legal documents landed on Ricardo's antique mahogany desk like a declaration of war. Full custody, restraining order, harassment. The audacity was breathtaking. He had spent a fortune on the best legal team in Madrid, and they had been outmaneuvered by Timoteo Garcia, a man he vaguely recalled from Elena's college photos as a soft-spoken intellectual. "This is an ambush," he growled into the phone at his lead counsel, a shrewd corporate lawyer named Marcos Toro. "How did they beat us to this? I pay you 700 euros an hour to be proactive." "They were patient, Ricardo," Marcos said, his voice a calm counterpoint to Ricardo's rage. "They waited until the child was born in Andalusia, establishing jurisdiction there. It's a clever move. It forces you to fight on their turf. And this claim of adultery, do you have any exposure there?" "It's a he said, she said situation," Ricardo lied, his words tasting like ash. "I hope so," Marcos said dryly. "Because if they have evidence, this custody battle becomes exponentially harder for you. The judge won't look kindly on it." Ricardo's legal strategy was to paint Elena as an unstable, vengeful woman who had fled their marriage in a hormonal rage and maliciously taken a father from his son. They filed motions demanding a psychological evaluation for Elena and immediate DNA testing to establish paternity, framing it as a necessary step due to her erratic behavior. The calm before the storm. In Granada, Elena read the filings with a knot of ice in her stomach. The words were a vile caricature of the truth, twisting her desperate act of self-preservation into a portrait of mental illness. "This is what they do," Timoteo assured her over the phone. He had flown down to meet with her and her sharp, empathetic local family attorney, Sarah. "They throw mud, hoping some will stick. But we have something they don't, the truth. And we have evidence." The evidence was simple and devastating. The day Elena left, she had instinctively gone back upstairs. In her daze, she had seen Ricardo's laptop open on his desk. On the screen was his calendar, open to that very day's entry. 2 p.m. Sofia. But it wasn't the single appointment that was damning. It was the fact that it was a recurring weekly appointment, stretching back 6 months. With a shaking hand, she had used her old iPhone to take a clear, time-stamped photograph of the screen. It wasn't just a one-off mistake, as he had claimed. It was a long-term, calculated affair. "We save this for now," Timoteo advised. "We don't play our best card at the start of the game. Let him build his fortress of lies. We'll tear it down when it matters most." The Vista, the preliminary hearing, was scheduled to take place via video conference. A cold, impersonal forum for a war so deeply personal. Elena sat at Sarah's polished office table, Leo sleeping soundly in a car seat at her feet. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair neatly pulled back. She looked serene, a stark contrast to the unhinged woman described in Ricardo's legal filings. On the large screen, she saw him for the first time in nearly a year. He looked thinner, his face etched with lines of stress and anger. The hearing was a brutal, clinical dissection of their life. Ricardo's counsel painted her as a flighty, emotional homemaker who had abandoned a loving, supportive husband. When it was Sarah's turn, she spoke with quiet, methodical precision. "Your Honor, my client, Ms. Castillo, did not abandon her marriage. She fled a toxic and unsafe environment for herself and her unborn child. She left her home on August 28th of last year after discovering her husband, Mr. Navarro, in the marital bed with his subordinate, Ms. Sofia Vega." Ricardo flinched on the screen, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. Marcos Toro immediately objected. "Objection, Your Honor. These are unsubstantiated, inflammatory accusations. On the contrary, Your Honor, Sarah continued softly, we have proof that Mr. Navarro was involved in a long-term affair with Ms. Vega, evidence we are prepared to present at trial. We, the judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, looked over her glasses. Mr. Navarro, is it true that Ms. Vega is currently residing with you in the marital home? Ricardo spoke through clenched teeth. Yes, Your Honor. She is a colleague who was in a difficult living situation. I was offering support. The lie was so pathetic, so transparent, that the judge's expression remained unreadable. The court orders DNA testing to confirm paternity immediately. A guardian ad litem will be appointed to represent the child's best interests. Ms. Castillo retains temporary full physical custody. Mr. Navarro, given the circumstances and distance, you are granted 2 hours of supervised virtual visitation per week. We will reconvene in 90 days to review the findings. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. They hadn't fallen for his lies. As the video conference ended, Ricardo's image lingered on the screen for a moment before snapping off. For the first time, his mask of controlled fury slipped, replaced by a look of pure, undiluted shock. He had used his power and money to bully and control everyone in his life. He had just discovered they were useless against the simple, unassailable weapon of the truth. The point of no return, the 90 days leading up to the next hearing, were a brutal war of attrition. Ricardo's legal team flooded Timoteo and Sarah with discovery requests and depositions, a strategy designed to wear Elena down emotionally and financially. But Timoteo had prepared her. Elena's life was an open book, and it was a book filled with quiet competence and stability. The mud Ricardo threw refused to stick. Meanwhile, the court-appointed guardian ad litem, an attentive and experienced social worker named Ms. Pardo, conducted her investigation. She interviewed Elena extensively in her small, sunny apartment, observing her gentle, attentive interactions with Leo. The home was modest, but clean, safe, and full of love. Her video conference with Ricardo was another story. He tried to charm her, presenting himself as a heartbroken father, desperate to be part of his son's life. But Ms. Pardo was trained to see past such performances. The breaking point arrived 1 week before the final hearing. Timoteo called Elena. "It's time," he said. "We need a capstone, something to make their entire case crumble." Elena knew what he meant. For years, as the Navarro household manager, she had been responsible for organizing all their financial documents. One year, she had noticed a bizarre, recurring bank transfer of 100,000 euros made every quarter to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands called Navarro Strategic Investments. Ricardo had been vague and angry when she asked about it. "It's complex investment stuff, Elena. You wouldn't understand. Don't worry about it." Sensing his agitation, she hadn't pressed, but she had made a copy of the statements, filing them away with a vague sense of unease. Timoteo's forensic accountants had been silently digging. "Ricardo has been systematically hiding marital assets in that offshore account for the last 5 years, Timoteo explained. "It's a classic case of financial fraud against a spouse, but it's worse than that. The source of the funds is questionable. It appears to be linked to an insider trading investigation the SEC has been sniffing around for the last year." Timoteo Garcia requested a settlement conference with Ricardo and his lawyer. They met in a neutral conference room in Cordoba. Elena was not present. Timoteo was her sword and shield. Timoteo laid it out. He presented the calendar photograph, proving the long-term nature of the affair. He presented the scathing report from the guardian ad litem. And then he slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a bank statement from Navarro Strategic Investments. Ricardo's face went white. Marcos Toro glanced at the statement, then at his client. His eyes narrowed. "Here is our settlement offer," Timoteo said calmly. "Elena gets full legal and physical custody of Leo. Ricardo gets supervised virtual visits and 4 supervised in-person visits in Granada per year at his own cost. He will pay a substantial fixed amount of child support until Leo turns 21. In exchange for his signature on this agreement, that file," he tapped the bank statement, "remains a private matter between us." It was checkmate. Marcos Toro looked at Ricardo, whose arrogant facade had completely crumbled. He was a cornered animal. "Take the deal, Ricardo," the lawyer advised in a low voice. Ricardo left the conference room a broken man. He drove back to the estate in a daze. When he walked through the front door, Sophia was there, glass of wine in hand. "Well, what happened?" "She won. She won everything," he said, the fight gone out of him. He looked at Sophia, at the pink dressing room down the hall, at the life he had chosen. It was all a cheap imitation, an empty prize. Sophia stared at his defeat. She had hitched her wagon to a star, and the star was falling out of the sky. There would be no ring, no Mita Navarro title, no access to the unlimited funds she had dreamed of. He was damaged goods. Without a word, she turned and walked upstairs. An hour later, she came down with 2 suitcases. She didn't look at him as she walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, the question devoid of emotion. "Don't worry about me," she said, her voice hard. "I always land on my feet." She walked out the door, leaving him alone in the vast, silent glass house. The laughter was finally gone. The quiet victory. The divorce was finalized on a crisp, clear day in early spring. The paperwork, signed and sealed, felt less like an ending and more like a quiet, formal beginning. Elena sat in Sarah's office, the pen feeling light in her hand. There was no triumph, no desire for vengeance, only a deep sense of peace. She hadn't destroyed Ricardo. His own choices had done that. She had simply refused to be a victim of his ruin. The settlement was more than generous. It wasn't about the money itself, but what it represented. Security, independence, and the freedom to give Leo the life he deserved. A life built on a foundation of honesty and love, not glass and lies. A few weeks later, Ricardo came for his first supervised visit. The meeting was at a bright, cheerful family center in Granada. When Elena walked in, holding Leo, she saw Ricardo waiting. He looked diminished. The custom suit hung a little looser. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He looked at Leo, now nearly 1, a happy, babbling baby with a shock of dark hair like his father's, and Elena's calm blue eyes. Ricardo's face, for the first time, showed a flash of something beyond anger or self-pity. It was raw, painful regret. He's beautiful, Elena," he stammered. His voice choked. "His name is Leo," she corrected him, gently, but firmly. She handed Leo to him. Ricardo held his son with an awkwardness that broke her heart a little. He had missed everything. The first smile, the first laugh, the sleepless nights, the small, miraculous moments that forge the unbreakable bond between a parent and child. He was a stranger to his own son. She watched for a few minutes as he awkwardly tried to play with Leo. She saw the ghost of the man she had once loved and the man he had become. He was no longer a monster in her mind, just a sad, flawed man who had broken the most precious things in his life. She walked up to him before leaving. "I hope you can be a good father to him, Ricardo. He deserves it." He looked at her, his eyes full of a galaxy of unsaid things, apologies, questions, regrets. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Elena, for everything." The apology, when it finally came, felt distant, like a message in a bottle that had reached the shore long after the ship had sailed. She no longer needed it. "Goodbye, Ricardo," she said, and walked out into the sunshine, feeling nothing but lightness. Her redemption wasn't in his fall, but in her own ascent. She bought a small house with a wide porch and a view of the mountains. She started a small online art consulting business, helping clients build their own collections. Her old passion, so long dormant, bloomed again. Her life filled with the quiet joys she had once craved. Leo's laughter echoing through the house, the smell of paint and old books, the constant comforting presence of her good friends from yoga class, the breathtaking beauty of a mountain sunset. She had walked out of the glass house with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child in her womb. She had been stripped of her name, her home, her security, but in losing everything, she had found herself. She was not Senora Elena Navarro, the millionaire's wife. She was Elena Castillo, a mother, an entrepreneur, a survivor. She had faced the storm and emerged on the other side, not just intact, but stronger, more authentic, and finally, breathtakingly free. The story of Elena's betrayal and redemption is now complete. Do you want to start a new story, or would you like to revisit any aspect of this narrative?